Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for coming out. It's a beautiful, wet day, and nothing better to do than to be out in Crown Place and have an enjoyable afternoon with my colleague Scott Reed as well, and Liz Marshall from Blue Water Country, I believe is Collingwood, Blue something, Blue Mountain. Listen, the way we're going to set up for today, I'm going to speak for a little bit. Then Scott Reed is going to speak for a little bit. Then Scott and I will have a joint question and answer period. And then we're going to turn the floor over to Liz Marshall from Blue Mountain. And there'll be some questions, time for questions on that as well. And now, Liz is going to be speaking about Crown land patent grants, their significance, their importance to everybody who owns land. Scott is going to be speaking about the process. Can everybody hear me? The bottoms? John Sidley in the back, you're the farthest one, you can hear me? Scott's going to be speaking about a joint resolution that Scott and I have presented to both the House of Commons and the Legislative Assembly in Queen's Park to entrench private property rights in our Constitution. And I'll let Scott will speak about the details of that, how the process works, the importance of that. And I thought I would do something a little different today. Going to have enough about property rights, but I thought I should maybe bring a few subjects into the discussion that are important to me. I think they're important to everyone. But also how different, the reason why property rights are so important in a larger context, and also some of the other factors that contribute to the society that we have today. And those two other factors, along with property rights, is common sense and the nanny state. Our Premier Dad, Dalton McGuinty, and just the overall growth of government. But I think I want to start with this. Everybody here has heard the term common sense isn't very common. Who's heard that? Raise your hand if you've heard that before. Come on, raise it up. Common sense isn't very common. Everybody's heard that. I want to ask you, for each and every person in this room who doesn't have common sense, raise your hand. Right? Now this happens all the time with me. Everybody thinks there's no common sense, but everybody believes that they have common sense. So there must be a bit of a disconnect between reality and what we perceive. And of course, you're all telling the truth, or maybe not, that you don't have common sense, but you think you do anyway. But what it tells us is that we ourselves believe in common sense, but we don't have much faith or confidence in the person sitting beside you, or your neighbor, right? I'm smart, I've got common sense, but my neighbor, well, they're a little bit shaky, right? They're not quite as... And what that allows, when we don't have faith and confidence in our neighbors, it allows government to take ownership and responsibility of things that we ought to be taking care of ourselves. And this dawned on me one day, a number of years ago. I was coming back from a large meeting down in Port Perry. And I was coming back with Merle Bowes. It was a late night. And there may have been a few other people in the car. Coming back from a landowners meeting. And we had a large meeting. There was 500 or 600 people there that night. And it was a great meeting. Thoughtful, entertaining, interesting, lots of good questions. But there was one dickhead who just was atrocious. It was terrible. And on our way back from that meeting, driving back to Lanark from Port Perry, all Merle and I talked about was this one fella, right? We didn't talk about the 500 or 600 good people who were at the meeting. We didn't talk about the multitude of good, thoughtful, sensible questions. All we talked about was this one dickhead. And it dawned on me that time, what is going on here? We can have a great meeting with 500 or 600 people, and we only talk about this one individual. And I realized that is what we do in this society. That's what, and it was just after that, I don't know if everybody remembers, on the television, on Global News and CTV, there was a few, there used to be a OPP sergeant named Cam Woolley. Anybody remember Cam Woolley? Yeah. Well, Cam Woolley would get on the news every weekend, especially on long weekends in the summertime when the OPP would be having their blitzes on for traffic, especially around the Toronto and the GTA area. And every weekend, Cam Woolley would get up on the television camera and he would speak about the most atrocious, foolhardy driver that the OPP caught that weekend. He talked about, some fellow who was driving 150 kilometers an hour, holding on to his infant, drinking a bottle of whiskey, going down the 401. And every weekend he would talk about the one atrocious individual, just as Merle and I were talking about that one individual. But what we don't realize is there was another 100,000 people driving sensibly and reasonably that we never hear about. We only heard about the one, you know what we call them. And that's what we see in our media. It's what we see in our politics. It's what we see in society. That's what we talk about is the one. And we come up with all kinds of laws because we think the one is everyone. We think that one is each and every person here. We think the one is your neighbor beside you. So we have to protect ourselves from that one. And we do it by harming the 599 others often. That's one element that I've seen. And when we lose faith and confidence in our neighbors, we lose faith and confidence in ourselves. And government likes to step in when that happens. Here's a little book I picked up. You can pick it up at most bookstores. It's a nice little one. It's a pocket edition. Right? And I want to see if anybody's got pockets that can carry this book. This is the 2010 Provincial Offences Act in Ontario. It's 3,500 pages in length, with lots of little fine print. Now they say ignorance is no excuse before the law, but I'd like to know how many people here know what's in this book. The interesting part about this, in 2003 when McGuinty took power, that book was 2,000 pages in length. It's now 3,500 pages. We've become a lawless, unruly bunch, I think. We need more laws. But when we put this in, also in the context, in Ontario now we have over 500,000 provincial laws. 500,000. Now, can you think of 500,000 things that you could do that would be illegal? Right? I can't think of 500,000 things, legal or otherwise. But also to put that in context, in BC and Alberta, they have 200,000 provincial laws. We have over 500,000. The law is creating ignorance when we get to that level. Right? The law is so complex, so convoluted, so unknown that it creates ignorance in itself. And why is it that in BC and Alberta they have 200,000 provincial laws and we have over 500,000? Well, Mr. McGinty has had a great hand in that. And you'll find that a lot of those laws come down to property ownership and the lack of regard for property rights. That's where there's been a huge growth in legislation, regulation, laws. And again, just put that's 500,000 provincial laws. We still also have our municipal laws. I know there's a number of municipal councillors here today as well. But we also have our municipal bylaws, our municipal laws. And Scott will tell you, we also have some federal laws, including the criminal law and a number of things. We've got quite a substantial amount of laws. And what's happening here, the lack of regard for property rights and the lack of confidence in ourselves creates that vacuum for government to grow. And property rights is indeed an essential ingredient to that. And also, we often think that that this is just the way Ontario is. It's always been this way. But it hasn't been. This is not. There's been a lot of changes in this province since I was a child. And I think anybody here will also recognize those changes. But back in the 1970s, we had a royal commission in Ontario. It was called an Inquiry into Civil Liberties. And it was done by the Chief High Court Justice of Ontario at the time, a fellow named James McGruer. And a great, fabulous royal commission. Unfortunately, not too many people know that it exists. But I just want to read a little bit in here. In this province, there is no constitutional restriction on the power of the legislature to deprive an individual of his property rights without compensation. A zoning bylaw may take away or diminish property rights, but no compensation is provided. The application of the principle is extraordinarily difficult and brings up many questions of the law. James McGruer went on to say that the only true purpose of government is to protect and promote the individual rights of the members in society. That was a High Court Justice. And when I read those, I thought, my, how many High Court Justices in Ontario or the Supreme Court in this country today would think that the role of government is to protect and promote the individual rights and the property rights of individuals. We haven't seen too many. But that was only in 1975 when he completed that inquiry into civil rights. And we can see government grows when there is a lack of property rights and a lack of faith in people. And it was interesting, just a couple of weeks ago, about a month or so ago, I don't know if anybody was following the news down in Toronto, but Dalton McGinty and the Attorney General, Chris Bentley, were musing about that maybe the people of Ontario have matured enough that we could maybe give them some freedom to have a beer at a festival, or maybe that we could relax those regulations because people are getting more mature in Ontario. Well, I don't need Dr. McGinty to tell me how to conduct myself. I don't need him to tell me what is sensible or not sensible. And it is, we should recognize that we have laws, and very good and proper laws, but laws on themselves are not the only solution. And, I'll give you this example. We have laws against bank robbery, but we still have bank robbers, right? It's, some people are going to break the law regardless of what the law is. What stops us from breaking the law is not this blue book. but it's our own respect for one another, our own conscience. We don't go out and steal from people because we know that it's wrong. We don't need Dalton McGuinty to tell us that it's wrong. We know that inherently. But Dalton McGuinty believes legislation is the solution to everything, and the lack of property rights is benefits him. It allows the bureaucracy to grow. We've brought in legislation like the Clean Water Act, the Nutrient Management Act, the 49 different designations that can be placed on your property, such as wetlands, ANSIs, buffer zones. There's even one called the hazardous, the hazardous beach designation. I'm not sure what a hazardous beach is, but somebody at Queen's Park will surely know. And we can see, when we have good government, it's because there's checks and balances. If there's not checks and balances, if there's not regard for property rights, government grows and grows and grows. If you want to take a look at extremes, North Korea, Russia, communist Russia, China, places that where you don't have property rights whatsoever, no regard for them, that creates the vacuum for government to get larger and larger and larger. We recognize that. Our motion by Scott and I is a nice simple one. It recognizes that people have the freedom to own, use, and enjoy their private property. Okay? And if the public believes it's important to take that ownership away, then the public should pay for it. Okay? And if you can imagine, if government had to pay for everything that they do, instead of making you pay, they might have a different belief in what they should be passing laws on. We've seen people who have had their property use diminished or taken away completely because of endangered species. We have people here in this audience who have had their properties designated as wetlands. We've seen people that have lost any ability to build on their property whatsoever because of the lack of property rights. So I'm going to leave it with that. I'm going to ask Scott to come up and give us a little background and details on our property rights resolutions. And I will say it's very unique. It's the first time in Ontario, first time in Canada, I believe, that there's been a joint resolution entered into both houses by the members from one riding to substantially protect individuals within the province of Ontario. Thank you very much, and here's Scott Bree for it.